Memory transcription subject, Captain Sovlin, United Nations Fleet Command. Date, standardized human time, March 26th, 2137. The captured Kolshian sentry led us up several flights of stairs after the UN soldiers rejected taking the elevator, and I waited with unease for a trap to show itself. There was only a modest room where an elderly Kolshian with baby blue skin and a pompous air about him waited. The figure claiming to be Moronis gestured to the seats, an offer Tyler accepted after some hesitation. I plopped down next to the blonde human, while a skeptical-looking Orcel found a chair next to me. Onlookers from the UN and Kolshian dissenters packed into the room, ready to bring the Commonwealth leader into custody. Would he be wise enough to surrender? Moronis leaned forward.
Well, humans, before you say a word, let me answer the obvious question. I'm Chief Moronis, the successor to Nikonus, but unlike him, I don't paint a target on my back. I've tried to operate from the shadows, and everything I've done has been to crush dissent and ensure the continuance of our work. I don't know if your kind can understand, but you simply must.
I understand you've built quite the underground city here. How many residents?
Tyler prompted.
Millions in this city alone. This is the Shadow Capital, a mirror to what you see above ground. But there are other residences beneath our cities with separate entrances. You could find your way to one of them by bullet train. Much of our space was devoted toward the Shadow Fleet before your breed destroyed it. I don't know what I hope for from this conversation. I believe you do care about your friends, so maybe if you realize that you're exposing them to tremendous harm, you'll do the right thing.
What are you talking about?
I'll explain everything. I can see several of my own citizens are curious to find out why we needed to protect them from predators. Let me start by directing a question at your off-world Gajid friend. Captain Sovlin, how would you feel knowing you and any other herbivore who's interacted with humans could wither from the inside out? That your mental faculties could vanish in an instant years later?
I waved my claws dismissively. I feel nothing, because it's not true. Predator contamination is a lie, Moronis. Everything the Federation taught is wrong. The humans aren't a disease.
Don't sound so convinced. You came here to ask why we began taking action against predators. I intend to tell you the full story, and after I do, we'll see if you still want to be sitting right next to one of those things. A disease is precisely what they are, and I'll lay out a scientific accounting for why that is true. You cannot argue with a mountain of evidence.
Not unless you're the Federation,
Samantha sneered.
Did some animal rot after it died, and you're convinced it's tainted?
No, it was much worse than that. The Kolshian race was placed in immense peril by the filth that festers in a predator's fluids, and in the humans' defense, I don't think they realize what they're doing.
Was Moronis really trying to sell this tired argument of predator exposure giving us predator disease? Terran therapists had shown that mental conditions were more complex, as were the actual neurological causes behind them. It was fear-mongering to allude that I'd show signs in a non-specific amount of years. While we hadn't known the Earthlings long enough to disprove that, they'd not passed any ill effect to the prey animals on their blue marble. I leaned back in contempt, though I noticed Orcel scooting her chair further away from the humans. She wouldn't take much convincing to believe that the primates were an infectious threat, given her instinctual disgust to them. I am curious what scientific account Moronis thinks he can string together. He does sound like he believes it himself, just like Nikonus did. I do want to know what pushed Arthur down the path of causing so much harm to hundreds of sapient species. Whatever the truth was, it could be as simple as one predator being a carrier for many diseases, and the Commonwealth applying that logic to anything that ate flesh. Even if it were true about humans, we knew that alien diseases didn't cross the species threshold due to differences in biology. I was at a loss, conjuring my own explanations. It seems my Terran companions were mystified too. Tyler confirmed that his helmet camera was rolling, fully intending to capture every word the Kolshian said on video. He rested his elbows on the table, sensing that juicy information was about to flow. The blonde human's expression was hidden beneath his mask.
Speak. Tell us everything from the very beginning. How the Shadow Caste came to be is our business.
Well, it started with a string of mysterious deaths, decades before we made first contact with the Far Soul. The strange disease was 100% lethal and unresponsive to our medicines, so if symptoms showed, it was a death sentence.
Moronis pulled up a series of mass graveyards and ghastly images of sickly Kolshians.
They would lose their memory and their sensibilities, resulting in aggression and delusion. At first, the plague didn't seem to be transmissible from person to person, so we didn't quarantine victims with a strict enough tentacle. It was only years later that the people who had contact started showing symptoms.
That's a long-ass incubation period.
Sam commented.
Indeed. There wouldn't be a trace of any microbial agents in their tissue, and yet their brains were rapidly and positively ravaged. Once we clued in to the staggering delay in symptom onset, scientists were able to piece together the origin. Stories from years before the first victims, where a local predator called the Tyranny went off the deep end and started dropping dead in the wild. Select other animals in the ecosystem to a lesser degree had also begun to decay. We established a link between the increased predator activity and the deaths that had plagued us.
Tyler recoiled in confusion.
I don't understand. How'd the Kolshians get infected to begin with? How's it spread? You all roamed the wilds enough for a plague to pop off.
We didn't know what the contaminant was, and we still don't. What we're certain of is that it contaminated the soil and the water, because victims were linked to nearby water mains and food shipments from the Tyranny plague's epicenter. That's why we can tell you scientifically that contact with predators and their byproducts leads to an irreversible decline. We called the disease the hunger, and the entire government banded together to nip it in the bud.
The hunger, I murmured. And that's what you call the human's vitamin deficiency in the archives.
Now you understand. And you'll understand how everything we've done has been to stop this scourge from ever showing its face. I'll address the human element after I've laid the groundwork, so there's no seeds of doubt. But to grasp where the shadow caste came from, I hope our citizens can understand what we're protecting them from. You have to know how we stop the spread of the disease.
Samantha groaned.
Oh, let me guess. Burn everything.
Actually, yes. Fire seemed to be the only thing that could cleanse away the contaminants.
While Chief Moronis searched up new images of the disease control efforts, I considered what I had just learned. The humans weren't reacting with enough concern toward this invisible plague that only showed the tendrils of its infection after years. The photographs that the Kolshian chieftain was displaying seemed like genuine historical documents. Had the Terrans not warned us about the risk of them spreading the hunger for fear it'd push us away? Perhaps they had a cure in the form of this B12 vitamin, but I didn't understand why the transmissible agent didn't show on any tests. Or Sal looked more petrified than I was with her extended contact with my friends today. Maybe predator disease can be caused by other factors than an infectious agent, but the Kolshians were right about microbes being one cause. I just find it difficult to believe that caring humans would put the Venlil at risk like that. I've seen firsthand how empathetic and protective they are toward their friends. Surely they would have warned Governor Tarver. Except Moronis claims they're unaware. The chief pulled up dated clips of Kolshian exterminators in full bodysuits which had complex air filters atop the standard getup. I could see them burning the sickly corpses of curved-fanged predators, and in some cases, living specimens that showed symptoms of the disease. In later timestamps, they had set out to wipe the Tyranny out entirely, even ones that hadn't presented with signs yet. The most horrifying footage was them tranquilizing their own infected citizens before burning them alive. Corpses from the mass graveyard were also dug up and incinerated to slow the soil contamination. This ghastly outbreak explained why they were so determined to cleanse predators from every ecosystem.
The exterminators were born. That fire suit acts not only as a safeguard from the flamethrowers, but also a biohazard suit, not unlike the gear the humans are wearing now. Those masks just might protect the Kolshians you've interacted with today.
Moronis continued.
Other predators besides the Tyranny were attracting the disease too, so we aimed to kill all of them. Any animal corpses had to be incinerated before its entrails could settle. Our own dead were reservoirs of disease too. It's the reason we have forsaken our aquatic roots. The water was its preserver. We've kept up those practices to this day to prevent it from ever returning, here or on other worlds.
I swallowed with unease, disquieted by my months in close quarters with the Terrans. Chief, might I ask, does this relate to predator disease at all?
It does. By tearing down those predator disease facilities, those humans are crippling your ability to detect the disease early. Aggression is one of the primary signs. Besides that, we couldn't afford to have any nonconformist violating our quarantine policies or engaging in predatory behavior. We barely kept a lid on the spread.
That's all well and dandy, but I don't hear nothing about no shadow caste.
Tyler pointed out.
It doesn't sound like you were doing this in secret.
We weren't, with the public health measures being so obvious. The secrecy didn't start until long after we put the plague to bed, when we turned our attention starward. We made contact with the Far Soul and eventually told them about the hunger. They were able to point out isolated instances of Telsk's animals suffering inexplicable declines in post-first contact times. While not as contagious as our case, it seemed to have jumped to their kind on occasion. We feared we brought the disease with us. We used old quarantine methods before the contaminants could mutate to their most transmissible form to stop the Far Soul from facing a similar outbreak to Arthur.
Sam crossed her arms.
You magically knew it was the same sickness and that it would turn out the same as your hunger shit.
Even if this one wasn't the same pathogen, it was close enough to hit home. Convergent evolution is our universe's reality predator. It's why we see such similar patterns in all worlds. All life forms exist to accelerate entropy. Chaos is the natural state of all we observe, and there is nothing that can facilitate such large-scale disarray and decline as this disease does. Lethal contaminants and predators are two tentacles of entropic force. It's why your ilk are found on all worlds. We do not accept this axiom.
And we don't accept people calling us predators, but you always find a way to do it anyway. Why don't you skip to the part where the shadow caste comes into the picture?
It all traces back to the Crocodile, and the Far Soul stopping us from doing what was necessary. It was a regrettable mistake to chance flesh-eaters escaping our oversight. Shall I continue, or is the long-maned one going to interrupt my story further?
Orcel squeezed her eyes shut.
Please, let him continue, Samantha. It explains a lot about why we're disgusted by predators. That response is triggered by ancestral sources of disease.
It's why humans are leery of insects, I remarked. I'd also like to hear the rest of Moronis' story, Sam. I'm, concerned.
You shouldn't be. We're not radiating invisible biohazards, for fuck's sake. But since Tyler's so keen on getting this jackass on the record, I'll let him talk a little longer.
The Australian soldier conceded. Good. I need to hear what he was going to say about the Crocodile. Nikonis mentioned that they were aggressive and that the Kolshians tried to find the source of it. Maybe Nishtal's population was carrying the hunger too. The tenets I'd thought hadn't held a shred of truth were starting to make sense in light of such dangerous contaminants that predators could pass along. At this point, I doubted the chief had any incentive to lie, and he had the weight of evidence on his side. Moronis' insinuation was that his people wanted to exterminate the Crocodile the second they identified the dietary risk. The question was why the Far Soul states had pushed back against it, and how they'd crafted the curing process. This could be the reason my own species was converted away from omnivory rather than killed. It might give us the full story of the conspiracy's founding and goals. Moronis waved a tentacle dismissively.
You know the deal. The Crocodile were aggressive, and when we noticed their diet, it explained why their temperament was so much different from ours. Contaminants in meat impacted higher thinking, culminating in the hunger after large quantities of buildup, perhaps passed down after it affects genes. We wanted to glass Nishtal, but the Far Soul couldn't live with killing another sapient race, not without exhausting alternatives.
The cure, I breathed.
Yes. The archives were established on Talsk as a secluded location for the experiments and a way to quarantine cured specimens. The hunger didn't present symptoms for years, so lengthy testing was the only way to gauge whether they'd been mellowed. The Far Soul's gene edits worked, to our surprise, and the Federation's purpose was born. We'd stop all sapiens from eating meat and cleanse their worlds to prevent exposure to the hunger.
Sam drummed her fingers with impatience.
I still hear fuck all about the shadow caste.
That all happened because there was public backlash to what we did to the Crocodile. Nishtal didn't appreciate being saved at gunpoint either, and we worried they could seek regression someday. The shadow caste was formed of those who believed in the cause, and with the Far Soul's aid, we set out to wipe the record and disguise future cures. The only way to ensure the cured species never found out the past was to make our own citizens unaware.
Why is it fair that we don't know the full extent of the predator threat? That our lives meant nothing to you? It clearly didn't even work because everyone found out the truth.
Orsel spat.
You helped the Arxer, and then these humans were left alive.
Darling, our plan worked for centuries, until Arrogance Niconas blabbed everything to a reporter. Just like he set out to reclaim anyone who rebelled against us, instead of crushing them like I did. They had their one chance during their uplifting. I agree that not knowing the full threat was a problem. The plague is still in the history books, but Arthur forgot why the pandemic was so scary. We needed a threat to continue to enforce our laws and remind people why predators were dangerous. The Arxer were perfect for that.
You wanted the war. For my family to get fucking eaten alive, so you had an excuse to keep up your quarantine measures, I hissed.
Yes, you get it, Sovlin. Back to the Kolshian lady's point about our predator occupiers here now. That's on the far soul. They refused to kill humanity like we ordered and lied about it, even though it was clear these primates were beyond salvation. We tried to fix them, the same as any omnivore, but the quarantine Terrans in the archives all exhibited traits of the hunger. We know now that a cobalamin vitamin gives them some strange long-lasting immunity, rendering the disease dormant and allowing sustained sapience. This requires further study.
Samantha slapped her forehead.
So you do know about B12 now?
We got some humans to talk about how they could adapt to plants without dying during our personal experiments at Malu. We believe these renewed curing efforts might have been successful in ridding you of the disease if you long-term abstained from flesh.
Ain't happening, for many reasons, not least.
I know you can't give up your addiction on your own. But listen, if you care about the friends you've been infecting, who could start dying in a few years, without warning, you must continue our work. If you care, you'll leave the herbivores alone. Maybe you'll even become a new threat. Enough to remind the masses to be afraid of predators. It's a sacrifice someone must make.
My eyes watered with sorrow as Chief Moronis finished presenting his case. His explanation fit with everything we'd uncovered along our journey, and it gave a reason for the Federation's entire history. It seemed a cruel twist of fate that loyal, friendly humanity would be asked to make that sacrifice, to isolate themselves so not to contaminate their friends. I'd come to love my crew aboard Monaghan's ship, and while the contamination sounded like a terrible way to go, I was willing to die for the Terrans' right to exist. Their culture was too rooted in hunting for them to give up their identity and cure themselves. If humans were immune to the hunger, as long as they could access B12, keeping to Earth and forsaking the Sapient Coalition might be the best option. I knew they'd never be the Arxer, not with how their empathy had prevailed time and again. My spines bristled as I waited for Tyler's response, which would address how the Terrans would handle this latent threat Moronis described. It didn't seem fair that after all this work to usurp the Kolshians as the galaxy's supreme power, the Predators had to take their place in some capacity. They didn't deserve to suffer for factors beyond their control. It's not their fault that they've been spreading the hunger. I don't think what the Kolshians did was right, but we can't let predatory diseases wipe out the galaxy. Tyler raised a finger in a wait-a-minute gesture.
That's a nice theory, except for the fact it's all horseshit. We ain't infectious, and B12 don't work like that. Your hunger is caused by prions, man.
Misfolded brain proteins.
Samantha chimed in.
Freak mutations that are transmissible if you make contact with infected tissue. The reason you see it most in predators is because they eat said tissue.
Chief Moronis blinked, dumbfounded.
You know what causes the hunger. You can treat it. I heard you did with your archives rescues.
The two aren't related. Prion diseases aren't treatable, but we can detect them with blood tests. We're not infected just by virtue of being predators or eating meat. That's the difference between us. We live in a world of science, and you live in a world of fear and speculation. We seek proof and answers, while you seek verification for your existing beliefs.
Tyler bobbed his head.
Our vision might be narrower than yours, but at least we ain't blind as you all. Sounds to me like you did all of that horrible shit for nothing.
It sounds like that to me, too.
Orsel hissed, while the Kolshian dissenters piped up with agreement.
You believe Terrans are moral and care for their friends. You said so. You have zero proof the humans, or any omnivores, are dangerous after all.
You tried to scare us into believing that it was dangerous to be around them. They're people like us, not biohazards or a threat. I'm sorry I considered it for a minute, I huffed. This is just another falsehood you broadcasted.
That's not possible. This human says it's transmitted by eating flesh.
Moronis protested, his tentacles flailing in frantic motions.
The hunger is seen on Earth, like every other world. We did this to save all sapient life.
Tyler slammed a fist on the table.
We don't need your salvation. We need two things. Your surrender, and you personally to show us where you keep your prisoners. This is our galaxy to run, and we ain't gonna be keeping up the death and suffering circus, 'cause you're the real predators. You've led the galaxy into ignorance, decline and disarray. Your legacy is entropy, huh?
If my words haven't moved you, perhaps that is all we leave behind. We were supposed to save lives, and without that purpose, the Shadow Caste is nothing. My Lord of the Work is to surrender, and lead you to the place where we keep humanity's friends. Follow me.
The Kulsian chieftain stood with a defeated posture, reeling from the human certainty that so-called prions were responsible for their plague. It was a positive sign that the Shadow Caste agreed to stand down, with their mission undermined and their fleet erased. I was relieved to hear that the Terrans weren't a hazard, and that their science had illuminated the dark corners of our past once more. Where Moronis claimed to have a mountain of evidence on his side, it was the Predators who could interpret it correctly. Orcel, the other Kolshian citizens listening, and anyone watching Tyler's video would see who was in touch with reality. Once we recovered our friends, the next item on the agenda would be to set the galaxy onto a better path. There were many issues to iron out, but with the Federation's lies and deceit stripped away, I was hopeful we could birth a new era of enlightenment.